Hi, everyone. Welcome to Against Gravity, your podcast conversation that brings you thought provoking conversations with creators, change makers, legacy builders, and innovators. I'm your host, Henry Devin. Today, I'm joined by Tonja Renée Stidhum. She's a Los Angeles based filmmaker. She's a writer, director, and producer of one of the exciting comedy series I've come across. And she's also the staff writer at The Roots. So, really a lot to talk about. So, we're talking about her work and also racial reckoning in the US. It's just a year since the death of George Floyd, and a lot has happened since then. So, we're going straight into race and police brutality and what can be done to ensure diversity and inclusion is really front and center of everything we do as a people and to ensure collective progress for all. So thank you so much for joining me, Tonja.
Hi, thank you, Henry. Thank you for having me.
Right, I'm in Ghana and it's hot almost every time. Tell us about the weather where you are.
It's very mild right now. It's actually cooler than a bit normal this time of year. So we actually have to sleep with like actual cover over us. But yeah,
Oh,
it's usually like very warm around this time. But it's just mild weather, pretty fair weather right now.
interesting. Reading about I mean, your bio, I came across spoke about you being made of sugar and spice and everything rice, and it caught my attention. Tell me about that.
I love it. So my grandmother, she's from a southern state. I'm from Chicago. I'm born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and a lot of Black Americans they had a great migration from the South to Chicago. So my grandmother made a lot of Southern dishes, and she one of those like cultural things is that she made rice with pretty much every meal. So I love every rice, and since I grew up and got I gained more friends. I love every rice from every culture. So I need to come to Ghana and get some jollof. I need to come and get some because I love all rice, all of it.
Definitely. I can't wait for you to taste Ghana Jollof and tell me what you think. So let's
I
make it
absolutely will.
happen soon.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about you. On a random day in 2015, you booked a one-way ticket to Los Angeles, and the rest of your life took off. Tell us about that leap of faith you took and how events turned out.
Yeah, so I was in Chicago actually. I was working at a law firm. That was my first full-time job out of undergraduate college out of college. I wanted to move out of my mom's house, so I just got a job that I can pay my bills, basically. And it was an unfulfilling, work experience, right? I was just working there just to pay my bills, and I always had this dream in the back of my mind that I wanted to work in film and TV. So my friend actually, she's actually my late friend because she passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately. But she moved to LA about a year before me, and I was always inspired by her. And I always heard these stories and stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to go to Los Angeles so badly. Because I first visited Los Angeles around like 2013, I think, and I fell in love immediately. So I'm hearing her stories and stuff, and she's kind of encouraging me to come and to move out. Just do it, right? Because if I waited for the perfect time, I wouldn't. So on one day, it was a plane sale. It was an airline sale. And it's usually like in the US, it's usually like maybe Tuesdays and Wednesdays, their sales. So she messaged me on a random Tuesday. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Virgin Airlines, which is now defunct, I guess, is having a sale." And I was like, "That was my sign," and I just did it. I bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for me, it looks like the leap of faith is actually paying off because 5 years on, you're an entertainment writer for The Roots. You're a script writer, producer, director. But really, for script writing, how did it begin for you? How do you always, had the idea of being a writer, developing a career out of writing?
Yeah, I would say pretty much since I was a kid that I knew I wanted to be some kind of writer. I didn't specifically know that screenwriting was a job yet. I just knew that I always loved movies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to create something like that. I just didn't have the words or the terms and, what these particular jobs were and what they entailed. So I always wanted to be some kind of writer. So I would write poetry, I write short stories. At one point, I wanted to be a novelist, but I always had this love for movies. As I grew up. And it wasn't until high school that I realized what a screenwriter actually was. And because I took a film class in high school and then I researched it and learned what this is. And I'm like, that's it. That's what I've always wanted to do. And so ever since then, it's been film. My first experience writing scripts actually dove into feature films first. So I wrote feature scripts first, and then I kind of did shorts, and now I'm kind of trying to get into the TV industry because it's just more consistent work. More than feature films. It's way more expensive to produce your own feature film. Of course, I've tried that and it's very expensive. Lots of lessons learned. But it's a thing that I'll always do pursue. But for now, I want to definitely be a TV writer in comedy specifically.
And I think you're doing amazing on that. But let's go to the roots. You are, writing for the roots. It's a very high-ranking Afrocentric media. How did you get into that line of work?
Oh my goodness. So when I first moved to LA, I got another job at a law firm actually, because again, I was doing this like safety net of, hey, I'm moving to LA. I need an apartment. I need to pay my bills. And I use that as a cushion until I can go into the industry, right? So while I was working there, I would freelance a lot. I would start building up my bylines and my clips and try to get my name out there into the media industry. And so that led me to actually another leap of faith, which is when I got my first major byline at Ebony Magazine. And that day I put in my 2 weeks notice at that law firm. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go and pursue this full time. So I call that my fling of faith. Like I flung myself, into, off the, proverbial cliff into this journey of just, taking a risk on myself. And so when I did that, I ended up getting a part-time job at Blavity and Shadow and Act. And so I was writing with them and contributing with them, and then also freelancing on the side. It was very, very challenging to write full-time, but I wouldn't change a thing because all that experience got me this full-time job at the Root. And now I can say I'm a writer and get paid for it.
And it's writing that we need to tell stories of people in Black communities, the amazing work Black people are doing to change the narrative. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I know it looks like you really fell in love with filmmaking. It has become a mainstay of your life. But growing up, are there any screenplays or films that sort of, influenced you or impacted your way of thinking as a filmmaker?
For sure. Probably the time that I knew that I wanted to make film, it was probably watching a lot of Disney films. The Lion King is my favorite. Anybody that knows me, within 5 minutes, you're gonna know that I love the Lion King. And as far as other like live action films, it's E.T. for me because that was Steven Spielberg's film E.T. That was the emotional moment that I had, right? I cried when at the end when ET goes back home and he tells Elliot, I'll be right here, and points to his heart. That had me crying so hard and bawling. And I'm like, why am I so connected to this film? And like, why is it evoking these emotions so strongly? And so again, when I learned that these are people who are actually writing these things, who are filming these things, directing these things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wanted to be able to do that for somebody else. And so that's my driving force with telling stories all the time. Any emotion, whether it's laughing, which is my favorite, whether it's crying, even if it's anger. If I evoke some kind of emotion in my storytelling, I think I did my job.
Oh, amazing. And I think one question I want to find from you is how fulfilling is it to see your film or your idea or your writing come to life on the big screen? How does that moment feel?
My goodness, that is the best feeling in the world. And I hope it never gets old, no matter how much I climb that ladder and do more major films. Because right now I'm in the independent space and I'm producing things myself or with a small crew of people. Um, when I first saw my work on screen and with an audience, reacting to things that I wrote and laughing at things that I wrote, like immediately, just being in the audience, it's a feeling that's like, only thing I could describe it is like perfect bliss, right? It's like it is my dream fulfilled. That's when I know I made it. It's none of those other things like what, like an Oscar or an Emmy, and those things are nice. I'm not saying I would turn those things down, but the core reason why I'm doing this is to get a reaction out of the audience and for the audience to connect to the things that I write.
Definitely. The voice of Tonja Renée Stidhum. She is a Los Angeles-based filmmaker, writer, director, and producer, also a staff writer at The Roots. We're talking her work as a filmmaker and also racial recording, which we'll come to a little bit later in our conversation. Now, I want us to dive into your production. It looks like my favorite in the last 1 week. I find time to watch it, and it's interesting. The Wing Chick series. This is a comedy, a serial comedy, written by Tonja. It's based off her life, so it's based off your life. And you've described Wing Chick series as the intersection where brown sugar meets girlfriends. Now, what inspired you to write this series, and how did it come about?
Yeah, and I call it that. I call Brown Sugar Meets Girlfriends because I love that era of Black comedy, like rom-coms, whether it's on TV or film. It's one of the Brown Sugar is one of those films I can just turn on and watch, or if I see it playing, on the TV, I just sit down and watch no matter where it is. So I just love those kind of films and TV. So with Wing Chick, it is based off my life. It's based off the dynamic that I have with my male friends. It usually ends up to something that's more complicated than friendship, and so I thought there was comedy in that, right? Even though while I was going through it, it was like devastating at times, or my heart was broken. Essentially comedy is tragedy, right? You can build comedy from tragedy. So I'm with hindsight, I'm able to to look back at it and laugh. But those kinds of that kind of content, and seeing, especially like with something like Girlfriends, which was created by Mara Brock-Akil, seeing this Black woman at the helm of something that really connected to people, and people still quote to this day, and people still they even want it to be a movie now. It's a TV show, and it ended, but people still love these characters. And so that's something that I want to create. I want to be able to create characters where they go on BuzzFeed and be like, hey, which Wing Chick cast member are you? And take a quiz, something like that. That's my ultimate goal. I want these characters to live on like forever.
Amazing. And the story of Raven is so interesting to me. The irony of her life, she writes for a dating website. She's a profiler, but her dating life isn't so good. And sometimes also give the best advice on relationships, marriage, just anything, they are unable to let them manifest in their life. So that's really interesting for me, for Raven. Uh, why did you decide to center the Wing Chick series on Raven? What really about her story you feel people need to know and connect with?
Yeah. Yeah, that dynamic in and of itself is based off something that I learned in my life. And Raven is based off me and all the shenanigans that I've been going through with dating and friendship and just navigating life. But that particular thing, that's what I learned about myself. I'm on this podcast now, like I'm giving advice or creating this sort of inspiration for other people. But then when it comes back to me, I have all these doubts and I have this imposter syndrome, or I feel like I can't do things sometimes, and I have those fears and everything. And I try to be transparent in that as well. But I learned that about myself, that it's easier for me to dispense this other advice, like, girl, he's not good enough for you, girl. But then I'll be in a situation where he's not good enough for me, but I continue being in a situation. Like, so it's like one of those things where I guess like that hindsight or that perspective, that outside perspective gives you a better view of what's going on in that situation. Whereas if you're in it, it's a little bit more difficult.
But why is that? Why is that people give the best advice cannot let them manifest in their lives?
I wish I knew, right? I feel like that's like a philosophical question that I'll probably find out once I learn the meaning of the universe, basically. But yeah, it is interesting though, and that's why I kind of wanted to explore that in this series, is because it's funny. Once you think about it, it's like that is really funny that you hear yourself saying these things, but then you don't apply it to your own life, or you can't help your own life in a way. So I'm looking forward to exploring that in a way. in the series.
Definitely interesting. And let's talk a bit more about the film industry, Hollywood. Stories around Black women are still fairly sparse. I read your mission at Girl Like Guest Productions, which you founded, is you want to increase visibility and quality of the images featuring Black people. Why is diversity in filmmaking still a challenge for Hollywood, and what can you do to tackle that?
Ooh, yeah, it's a lot of layers. It's a lot of reasons why. And me starting this production company, that's what I want to do. I want to foster more authentic stories and more stories across the Black diaspora. And I started with my late friend, the same, who encouraged me to go to LA. And so I'm fostering her legacy by continuing this production company, hopefully. And so I think with Hollywood in general, to be honest, it was founded on white supremacy, because even the first like major film, or what they call a picture show, was The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffin, which was KKK propaganda. And so like it was very overt and very direct. It was like, hey, this is what we want to, this is kind of propaganda that we want to show to the world, right? Which was white supremacist structures. And so now that we are getting a little bit more opportunities, I think that now we're having this conversation on who is gatekeeping these stories. Even when we have a certain number of people that are in leadership positions now that are Black or that are women or who represent the LGBT community, like all these marginalized communities, um, we still don't have that power, right? We're still not actually the gatekeepers. It's just a few of us that are able to get into that door. But to be able to dismantle that entire structure, that's going to take quite some time.
Very true. I agree. There are many layers, and it will take intentional, consistent policy, education, and campaigns, the whole movement to get that changed. Speaking to Tonja Renée Stidhum, she's a filmmaker based in Los Angeles. She's a producer, writer, director of Wing Chick series, also a staff writer at The Roots. Now we're going to the part of the conversation which is really controversial and topical, which is racism. I know racism has reared its ugly head in education, health, housing, politics, employment, and in everyday life itself. And racial discrimination generally is fueled by fear, hatred, ignorance, and sometimes ideology because of perceptions and narratives of people of a particular race. I mean, do you think, or did you envisage that at a point in the Wing Chick series, you're going to address some of the racist tropes Black people face?
Absolutely. And I think the smartest comedy does that, right? That's why we have satire. And I think the smartest comedy punches down. So it's like a social commentary on the elite, right? Instead of, I'm sorry, punch up. The smartest comedy punches up, actually. So you punching up to the power structure, and you make fun of them, or you highlight, them in a comedic way, but you're still giving this lesson, right? You're teaching this a lesson, or giving knowledge to somebody. So that's what I want to do. It's definitely going to be a lot of moments where a lot of Black people can relate to, especially when it comes to microaggressions, experiencing those things every day, which again is just a chapter of many, many other layers that goes right up into direct and violent racism, right? But we experience all those things within that structure, right? It's like the little microaggressions that may seem harmless, but they're not. They're part of this larger system that's against us. But so I'm looking forward to approaching those things as well, because it's definitely very relevant. I can't avoid it, right? It would be pretty disingenuous for me to.
Definitely. And since most of the cast in the series are Black people, it will really be helpful to, include some of these narratives and address it head on. Tonja, even beyond filmmaking, there is shared pain and loss in Black communities at the hands of police. And we saw the George Floyd murder, which was a major turning point. Black Lives Matter the work they do has never been more important than it is today. Why is it so hard for some police officers to treat Black people with humanity and respect in America?
This is an ongoing conversation that we're having. It's definitely an ongoing conversation that we have at the root. In my particular beat or section that I write in entertainment, so I don't really cover a lot of hard news, but that doesn't mean I can avoid it, even in my beat, because even celebrities get involved. They've gotten involved in marches and things like that. So, but I'm in it, right? Like I'm constantly getting this news, and I'm constantly talking about it, and so it's in our lives, right? It's something that we really can't escape, even though sometimes I think we deserve to, because it's traumatic. It's a lot of trauma, right? But it's so immersed in our lives. So with the police structure, with that system, I think similar to Hollywood, it is inherently white supremacist, because it's basically like the slave catchers of that were, they pretty much became policemen, right? Once slavery became illegal in the 13th Amendment, but then they decided to just switch that and make the slaves prisoners, basically, in a lawful way, right? They changed the laws that are still inherently white supremacist. So that's why we're having that conversation about reforming police versus abolishing police. And while this is an ongoing conversation, this is something that even I still have to do more reading on. But at this point, I am leaning more towards abolition. But there's a lot of resources out there that a lot of people can read on that. But I'm seeing now there is no reforming a police system that was inherently designed to do exactly what it's doing right now. And so that's why I think it's very difficult for them to see us as humans, because they never really did.
Right. And I mean, reflecting on it, there's so much involved here. A lot of things have to be unlearned to actually, create a pathway for equality. But personally, in your view, what can be done to help create a world where every Black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive?
Yeah, I think um, the people the activists and such who are working on the ground in the communities, I think are the way to move forward, right? We can't work within a system that was never designed for us. So I believe we have to dismantle that system and work in our own communities, with various mutual aids and things like that, to be able to thrive. Because trying to work with essentially our enemy, right? They're never going to see us as human. They're never going to really work with us. They may do it to placate or to be politically correct, or maybe for their own agendas, whether that's voting, whether that's getting votes, or whether that's getting funding. But it's never going to stop, and we're seeing that over and over again. So no matter how much we try, I think that joining in a community and helping each other as a Black community, I think that's what we're just going to have to do. And it's not going to be easy, of course, because we have been so immersed in this system. It's kind of the only system that we know. But joining this community of mutual aid, I think that's the only way forward.
Tonja Renée Stidhum there, a Los Angeles-based filmmaker. She's a writer, director, producer of the Wing Chick series, also a writer at The Roots. This is still Against Gravity, your podcast that speaks to legacy builders, game changers, and problem solvers. It's been quite a challenging year almost for everyone. The coronavirus has upended our way of life. Close to 3 million people have lost their lives to this deadly disease. I mean, personally, throughout the year, what lessons have you learned from the pandemic, and how has it changed your outlook on life?
Wow. Um, that is a great question, because it did change my outlook on life. And I think that's a lot of people can relate to that, because when we were in lockdown and or quarantining, and things were closed and we couldn't go out and escape the things that we needed to address in our lives internally, we were forced to reckon with, right? And so we're just at home, sitting, and what else do you have to do but to think and to assess your own life? So for me, I think the biggest lesson that I learned is to be patient with myself, because when I was here, when I came to LA, there's like this hustle mentality, like, oh, you got to get this done by this time, and everybody's doing something, and you kind of compare your life to other people. But obviously, with this past year, things halted and nobody was doing anything. And so there was nothing even to compare it to. You just had to look inward and to see what you want and what your goals are and what your version of success is. Like, that's what I learned, that nobody's version of success can define yours. Everybody has a different version of success, and that's valid. Whatever your version is that. So being more patient with myself, being more taking more care with myself, especially with mental health, and not overexerting myself, was definitely something I learned. Putting myself first was it.
Putting yourself first, quite important. And the
Yeah,
virtue of patience is taught all of us, patience, tolerance, and wait. Yeah, it's been
absolutely.
on this podcast Against Gravity. We have the biggest Against Gravity moment, where our guests reflect on their lives and tell us one of the most challenging moments that they had to cross. It really, almost tore them apart. Even some people, it tore them apart, but they were able to, you know grow out of it, become better after that. So Tonja, what is your biggest Against Gravity moment?
Wow. First of all, I love the name of this podcast because of that concept. I'm like, that's great. Against gravity. I'm like, that is perfect. It explains it perfectly. And I think probably my most challenging moment. If you would have asked me this probably a couple of years ago, I would have just said moving to LA. But now, now that I've been in LA, it is probably the year that I freelanced full time for a year. So I didn't have a full time job. I was just depending on freelance checks, which is not the most stable way to live at all. Because not only are you depending on something that is not completely sure, because you pitch something, you may get it picked up, but you may not, right? And so your bills and your shelter, your food is all dependent on that. Not only that, but once you do get it accepted and you write the piece and it's all done, you may not get paid on time, which is an issue, which is an issue that we're all dealing with right now, and why a lot of freelancers have unions and things like that, which is good to protect them. And in California, there are laws, there are particular labor laws that people have to pay at a certain time, that you can pursue if you do know your rights. But that year was probably the hardest, not even probably, it was definitely the hardest financial year that I ever had. I'm still recovering from it. My credit was at its lowest during that year. I had the most inconsistent financial like bills. I was behind on a lot of bills, all that stuff. I had to downgrade a lot. My first apartment was this nice 1 bedroom apartment. Like, it had the, decadent like brick wall. It looked really cute. It was nice. But once I did the freelance risk, I had to downgrade. So I moved to a studio, a way smaller place, and I just had to humble myself. But it was a lot of setbacks. But at the same time, it did teach me and prepare me for what I'm trying to aim towards. Because, to be honest, the industry I'm trying to get in, while it's more stable in comparison to feature film, it's more stable work. But still, even with TV, you only work on one project a few months out of the year, and then you're back to trying to find another job. So you can, you may get like a good lump sum, but you also have to learn how to save and invest and budget wisely. So I think that year of freelancing taught me how to budget for sure. So I'm gonna have to do that anyway. It'll just be with more money, thankfully. But I'm still gonna have to do it.
And look at where you are now, in a better place today.
Yes.
Yes, that's the beauty of life. We go through so many things, but we always have the willpower to withstand and come out stronger. So away from all the work, Tonja, I want to know, how do you keep sane? How do you unwind? How do you relax?
Oh my goodness. That is very, very key, because if not, I would just go wild, wacky. Like, my mind, the way my mind works is I'm very scatterbrained. So I have a lot of ideas swirling in my head right now. Even as I'm speaking to you, I'm thinking about, oh, what's the next thing I got to do and things like that. But the main thing that I incorporate into my life is meditation, actually. And so I made a hard, fast rule that I wake up every morning. I don't even look at my phone because that's a reflex too. You just look at your phone and see what's going on Twitter or Instagram or something like that. I don't even do that. I don't check my messages. I don't check my texts. I wake up. I have this app called the Insight Timer, and so it times you whatever time you want to meditate. And so I meditated, and it has the app has like this music, like really tranquil music going on in the background, so it's very calm environment. And so I meditate, and I center myself, and stay in the present moment in that way. And so that has kept me sane every day. And then in addition to that, it's just making sure that I take days off, like literal days off, like where I'm not just taking a day off just to write on another project, because I work at the Root full time, right? And I work, a particular set of hours or whatever. But then I'm also hustling and doing my own side projects so I can try to get into writers' rooms or try to sell my show and things like that. So that's work too. Even when I'm off work, I have to work. But so I make sure that I take actual days off while I'm doing no work. And I usually love days where I'm absolutely doing nothing. Like I have nothing on the schedule, nothing. I just do whatever I want, which it could be nothing. It could just be sleeping. It could just be laying around, watching YouTube videos, whatever. But those things are that it helps for sure.
Definitely. And I know you review films and you have a podcast as well, Cinema Band, that, yes, that reviews films. I want to know, what's your favorite film?
Yeah, Cinema Bun. Actually, we had to cancel that podcast because both of our lives got so busy. But it was so much fun, and I also review films at the Root, so it's not like I stopped doing that. But so would you say my favorite film?
Your favorite film?
My favorite film of all time. I would probably have to say The Lion King. That's my favorite.
Oh,
The favorite film, like of all time. Like if I had to pick one, just one. I know it's really hard, but The Lion King. I always tell people this. I can perform that movie as a one woman show. I know it front to back. I've seen it so many times. I love it.
definitely. So, are there any projects you're working on currently beyond
Yeah,
the series?
yeah, but beyond Wing Chick. So Wing Chick, I'm currently in development for a distribution soon, so the world can see it hopefully. And then also I'm working on other pilot scripts, so I can get those set up to either get into writers' rooms. And I'm also developing another workplace comedy with a writing partner. I pitched that to a network, and we're trying to pitch it to other networks as well. And so we're working on the treatment and show Bible, polishing that up for that. So we can probably get that sold. So I'm always writing, for sure. I have some short scripts that I actually want to film once things calm down with the global pandemic and the restrictions and vaccinations and things like that. So yeah, I'm always creating, always writing.
Definitely. Tonja, before you go, for so many filmmakers across the world, in Africa, young people who are interested in storytelling, what will be your message to them? Why should they ensure they bring this career in them to life for young people who want to venture into filmmaking?
Absolutely. My biggest advice is definitely to, if you want to take a risk, go ahead and do it. Do it scared. I think that's the phrase that I've seen a lot on internet, is just do it scared, right? Because bravery isn't necessarily the lack of fear; it's having fear but doing it anyway. And that's what makes bravery. So even if you're scared, even if you're nervous, just push forward, because the world does need your stories. There are a lot of stories out there, of course, and the market is very congested, but that shouldn't sway you, because still nobody can tell that story just like you. Like me and you, Henry, we can tell the exact same story or the same plot, but it will be executed differently because we're two different people and we have two different perspectives. So all of your stories are valuable and they're valid. And so if you have a story to tell, go for it.
Definitely. Even if you're scared, even if you never just push ahead, all your stories are valuable. Wow. The amazing voice of Tonja Renée Stidhum, a filmmaker who is a scriptwriter, producer, director of the Wing Chick series. She's also an entertainment writer at The Root. Thank you so much for coming on Against Gravity. We are grateful for sharing your experiences, your insights, and your thoughts on the work you do and also racial reckoning in America.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. For you watching or listening to us here on Against Gravity, thank you for tuning into this episode and sharing your time with us. This podcast is powered by Picture, the new narrative for Afrocentric content. So don't forget to check out the Afrofem photo collection. This is a free collection of images amplifying the diversity, resilience, and beauty of Black women at picturestock.com. Check it out. Use these images for your marketing, change the storytelling, change the narrative, and project Black women in a more positive light. As usual, I leave you with a quote from our guest, Tonja. Don't be scared. Even if you're scared or nervous, just push ahead because the stories you have are valid and they should be told. Thank you so much for Against Gravity. Thank you for tuning in for all Graviteers. And take care of yourself, stay safe, and have a good one.